Judges chapter 14. Judges 14. So as we begin, I want to look back into Judges 13, just glancing back up to verse 12. Manoah was speaking to the angel after the angel had already given instruction to his wife. Remember that? And Manoah said, now let your words come to pass to the angel. He says, what will the boy's rule of life and his work? What would be the boy's rule of life and his work? What will be his purpose? What will be that motivating force? What will be that sort of one guiding principle on which he will live? And this is the guidance of a life. This is so important, really kind of what we touched on there a moment ago. What is the authority in his life? His father knew, Manoah knew this was important for this boy to understand, for Samson to understand. What was this authority and this guiding principle in this work of his life to be? Remember back in the days when you were flying, you could sit in your seat in an airplane and you could actually see in the cockpit? And that was a long time ago, I guess, now. But sometimes you'd sit up far enough to the front that you also could hear things. And which was kind of cool, you kind of glancing at your pilot and seeing what all they're doing. But imagine if you were up there and you heard the pilot say, the co-pilot say, guidance systems are on. We're coming in for landing. It's foggy. Visibility is poor. And the pilot said, let's shut off the guidance systems and hope for the best. Let's just see how it turns out. You'd be like, what? Shut off the guidance systems? This is the idea of kind of what we spoke about is so many people are going into this year with no guidance system, no overriding principle, no authority to their life, and going to try real hard and hope for the best. And there's all kinds of quotes like, if you don't know where you're going, you'll never. How do you know when you get there? Or if you're going nowhere, you're most likely to end up there. There's all kinds of cute little quotes around that. And the idea is the same is do you know where you're going? Have you given it thought? Have you given it the principle, the guiding force of your life, given that authority over to that guiding principle, which ought to be the Word of God, the presence of the Holy Spirit, with that sort of overarching idea that Jesus is the Lord of my life. Manoah's asking that for his son. He wants to know that there is a guidance system in place for his son because he knows he's going to need it. For a nation that has been full of idolatry, a nation that has been chasing other things and turned their back on God and is under God's judgment through this oppression by the Philistines. And we can go right into chapter 14 and we can see this Samson has grown up now into a young man. And I'm going to give you a couple things to look for. And here's what I think it'll point you to his overriding principle in his life. If you look at these. Because there's a whole bunch of words that are repeated in here. And one of the words is the word down. Going down. They went down. And the indication in it is that Samson's life is characterized by this descent. This constant descent. Instead of ascent. Instead of rising up, he is going down. He is lowering himself into lower and lower places. The other one is the word telling, the idea of listening or telling someone or not telling. So let's watch for those. chapter 14, verse 1. Now Samson went down. There's your first went down. Samson's first act of his life, as we see as a young man now, is to go down to Timnah, a Philistine city, one of the ruling cities of their oppressor, one of the ruling cities that worshipped other gods, that had brought their idolatry into Israel, and Israel stumbled over the idolatry and turned their back against from their God and turned towards these other gods. Samson was going down. It was an act of descent to lower himself to go into this city of Timnah. Not a kind of a place that a Nazarite would go, a man committed to God, a man whose life was supposed to be about this Nazarite vow to keep himself for the purpose of God. He goes down to Timnah. He saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. And so he went up and told his father and mother. He had to go back up to tell his father and mother. There's the first sort of telling. He's telling. He's not listening. He's not asking God. He is telling. The word told there. He told his father and mother. I have seen a woman in Timnah. It's just a little side note, ladies. She has no name. That was for the ladies' study. Some people are going, why did he bring that up? Why does she have no name? Woman of Timnah, the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. Doesn't sound like a humble man. He doesn't sound like a man that is committed and guided by the hand of the Lord. He begins immediately sounding like a man is guided by the flesh and his own desires, and by his human sinfulness. Get her for me as a wife. Well, it's the father's job to go in the culture and establish a wife and the bride price and set everything up. I don't know how it was in the Philistine culture, but in the Jewish culture, this was what he was asking his father to do. Verse 3, then his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all my people that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Mom and dad understand that the guiding principles of God, already given and established in their culture and through traditions of the scriptures that they hold fast, they already know through their laws and their ways. God has said, marry within your clan, marry within your people. And you're going outside of the people to a godless people. And his parents say, this isn't right. Is there no woman within our clan? They call him on it. Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she pleases me well. She pleases me well is saying she in my eyes, she is just right. In my eyes, she is exactly what I want and the exact person I need. And so she was right in his eyes, and so he commands his father to go set up this marriage because he wants to marry her. This pleasing is doing right in her own eyes, just like everyone in the culture. The whole culture and the whole time in the whole book of Judges is characterized by this idea that everybody did what was right in their own eyes, right? And so Samson's not, out by himself where everybody goes, man, that guy Samson, look at his attitude. He's fitting right in. He's doing what the whole culture is doing. Pleases me well. Now, there's probably a whole message, the application into our culture from that. But let's move on. Verse 4, but his father and his mother did not know that this was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Philistines had dominion over Israel. They ruled them. And the Lord was looking to move against the Philistines. when there's no appearance that the people had any desire, had any reluctance of being under the oppression of the Philistines at all. But they just accepted it as this is the way life is. Verse 5, so Samson went down. There's another going down. He went down to Timnah with his father and his mother. And he came to a vineyard of Timnah. Part of the Nazirite vow was to not partake of anything of the vine. Going to a vineyard, not a very wise move, not the kind of place for a Nazirite to visit. And so we begin to see that this calling on his life, this Nazirite call that was really before birth, was at conception. He was conceived into this Nazirite vow because his mother had to live out this Nazirite vow at least until he was born, and then he had to be raised in this Nazirite vow. His whole life was committed to the Lord in this way. And so we see that this is not important to him. We begin to see that this doesn't have a lot of meaning to him because he's going to the vineyard. It's the wrong place for a man set apart from the fruit of the vine. And so we see it is a descent. It is a parting and a putting distance between himself and the things of the Lord. It is moving away from the guiding principle in his life. Now to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. So the young lion seems to be, as I look at this, sort of this attention getter, that this man that is supposed to be following this Nazirite vow should have kept himself away from this, but he wanders into the vineyard, and lo and behold, a young lion comes out roaring against him. A little bit of a wake-up call that if he hadn't been in the vineyard, the lion would, to me, it's just the Lord trying to get his attention. A little bit of a wake-up call, not to hurt him, not to harm him. He's given the power through the Spirit of the Lord to tear this young lion apart with nothing in his hand, showing the power of the Lord. This man that seems to be ignoring the guiding principle, and the Spirit of the Lord is upon him, and God's showing him what he can do and the power that he can bring into his life. But he's taking it for granted. He's parting from this guiding principle. And then he did not tell. There's that repeating of that word of told, did not tell. He did not tell his father and mother. Why didn't he tell them? Because he knew that they would be disappointed. He knew that that guiding principle that was supposed to be in his life, this Nazirite vow, was still meaningful to them. And so he failed to mention that he had violated and disrespected those things. Verse 7, then he went down, it's the third one, and he talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. Verse 8, after some time when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. And he took hold some of it in his hand, and he went along eating. And when he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So we see the third mark of descent, that he went down again to talk to this woman because he pleased him well. Along the way, he turned aside. He took a little detour to go see the carcass of the lion. What a strange detour. I wonder if the carcass of the lion is still there. This is a man supposed to be avoiding dead bodies, avoiding unclean things, And this detour that he took was a detour away from the call in his life, away from that guiding principle you are going to get tired of me mentioning. And he goes to the carcass of the lion, but he's rewarded with it, a temptation, a new temptation. To not just be in the vicinity of the carcass of the lion, but to reach in the carcass of the lion and scoop out the honey that is sweet. And he does so with no apparent thought to what he was doing and the effect it would have on him. And it was pleasing to him, and that was what is important to him. And then he gave some to his parents. And he gave them this uncleanness, this honey that came from this carcass. But he did not tell them. And again, there was a telling of the things that should not be told, and a not telling of the things that should be told. His life is characterized by his flesh and the lies that he spreads. That the lies become a convenience only because he becomes his own guiding principle. This is what I want, and my emotions and my feelings in my way is the only thing that's important. And if it brings me to lie to get those things, to have those things, then he had justified his own lies. Verse 10. So his father went down to the woman. Samson gave a feast there for the young men. Used to do so. Verse 11. And it happened when they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. What is going on is, as he first went down again to see the woman, as this wedding was being established, the preparations were being done. The father goes down to see this woman. He probably at the onset of this marriage, he was to pay at least part of the bride price for a bride. This was a deal worked out between the groom's father and the bride's father. And then it would be like a 7-day feast, which would be the beginning of this wedding. And at the end of the 7 days, would be the consummation of the wedding. In the beginning, there was some indication in those cultures that the bride wouldn't actually leave her father's home until well after that, and really until she became pregnant. And that was the only way that man became acceptable, if he was going to bring a child, allow her to bring a child into the world. So there's some different ideas there. And so part of that is you're blending the Jewish culture with something that the Philistines had. And so normally this would have been at the bridegroom's, this wedding, but this young men usually threw the feast, but in this case the bride and the bride's father threw the feast. That's what it says. The young men used to do so. And so this is the 30 companions then sort of are the 30 men from this city of the Philistines. It was sort of 30 men that sort of looks like this groom's party, we might say, but it was more of her town, men of her town, and maybe of her family, her clan, that are basically watching over her to make sure this guy that she's marrying was going to take care of her and treat her right and so forth. And so they were sort of the goons that were going to make sure that she was done right, she was done well. And which probably brings some interesting pictures to mind in weddings you've attended. But we'll leave that for another day. Verse 12, then Samson said to them, let me pose a riddle to you. If you can correctly solve and explain to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. And they said, pose your riddle that we may hear it. So he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Of course, we get the inside information that he's talking about the lion and the honey, which were markers of his sort of excursion from this path that he was supposed to walk, from this life as a Nazirite. The honey, the lion, all of that was a detour of his life. And from that detour that he is sort of creating this riddle out of his sin. He's making a game out of his sin. He's going to pose a riddle to these men and make this wager. This was something that was done apparently at that time, that riddles were sort of this form of entertainment, that it was somewhat common. So for him to say at this sort of feast setting of the 7 days, coming into this feast to offer this riddle in this way, would have been some of the entertainment of a 7-day feast, because you can only eat so much, right? Although we try. And so he gives them this riddle, within that paragraph. If you can correctly solve, is that idea of telling. If you can explain, is that, again, that idea of telling is repeated several times in that paragraph and the paragraphs that come of this idea of explaining, of telling. And so, again, we see this repeat of this word that becomes, again, this mark of telling things that ought not to be told instead of listening, and then withholding things that ought to be told. So he poses this riddle to them for this wager of this clothing. Now this is linen garments and changes of clothing. So most people at that time probably had their day-to-day work clothes, an undergarment, an outer cloak, and then they had sort of maybe their Sunday go to meeting, a garment and an outer cloak. They didn't have a closet full of clothes like most of us probably have in some form or fashion. This linen garments and changes of clothes are the high end. These are the name brand sort of clothes that he's talking about. He's talking about bedding 30 of three-piece suits with a dress shirt. That's kind of the way we would look at it. And for each one of them would have to come up with a three-piece suit and a dress shirt. In the end, if Samson wins, he's got 30 garment, three-piece suits with dress shirts. He'd be way up on the ladder, in his mind at least, that this would be a richness in his life. And so they say, this sounds like a great game. And so they join this, give us the riddle, and they do so. Now for the last part of verse 14, now for 3 days they could not explain the riddle. Explain is again that same word of told, telling that we talked about. So they're now 3 days into this, verse 15. But it came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband, that he may explain the riddle to us, or else we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is that not so? First thing is, it talks about the 7th day, and maybe your translation says the 4th day. There is that's what the Septuagint says, the 4th day. It says in verse 14 that 3 days they could not come up, and then you move into the 4th day because the whole riddle is across 7 days. So I don't know if this is the 7th day of the week. We're not quite sure, but there seems to be there's a little difference there that you see in the scriptures, but it's most likely talking about this 4th day, this next day after they are halfway through the week now and realize that they're not going to come up with this. So they tell her to go entice your husband to explain this riddle to us, and if you don't, we're going to burn your house down, you and your father's house down. And so they're up in the ante a little bit. So now you sort of look at these 30 companions. They're like, they're in it to win it, right? It is more important to win this even to the point of cheating or doing whatever it takes, bringing harm to others. But this is just consistent with the culture. And frankly, they're being very consistent with Samson and everybody else in attendance, apparently. And so they encourage her to take care of this and tell them the riddle, or they're just going to burn her father's house. And the accusation is essentially, did you just invite us 30 to your wedding just so you can take advantage of us and squeeze us for these 30 sets of clothes for your husband? That's what's being asked there. Because we think you just invited us to put us in this place to take advantage of us to lose this bet. And so they're putting pressure on her to like, no, we didn't mean that. That's not what's going on, right? And so they're escalating this friendly riddle, friendly little entertainment. You ever see we love to play dominoes when we were kids. We'd set up dominoes, like for a mile long. And you press the first domino, you watch the dominoes fall. But they also put the dominoes where they said the little domino, regular domino, hits one, it's a little bigger, a little bigger, a little bigger, until you see the final domino is this great big domino. And so what started as the little domino begins to topple and they get bigger and bigger. That's what you're seeing here. This started as a riddle that went wrong. As it fell over, it falls into and it begins this process of escalation till the stakes get bigger and bigger and higher as we go. Watch it as we go. So the riddle now turned into a threat to burn their house down. When Samson's wife, verse 16, wept on him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have posed the riddle to your sons of my people, and you have not explained it to me." Explained is the same word telling. And he said to her, "Look, I have not explained it to my father or mother." There's the same word again. "So should I explain it to you?" Same word again. And now she had wept on him the 7 days while their feast lasted. And it happened on the 7th day that he told her. There's the telling. Because she pressed him so much. Then she explained, we're told, same word, the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men in the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" What is sweeter than honey, what is stronger than a lion? They answer the riddle with their own riddle. And immediately knows that they've solved the riddle. And he also knows and understands the answer to their riddle. Do you know the answer to their riddle? What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? This is a man that could kill a lion with his bare hands. This is a man that is going to be shown to break ropes. They had this tremendous strength when the power of the Lord was on him. When he was in his lane, when he had that guiding principle in his life, that the Lord would empower him and do great things. But he was defenseless against the enticement of a woman, the tears of his wife. He had no power against those. What is sweeter than honey? Pleading the enticement of his wife, of a woman. What is stronger than a lion? He was conquered by his wife and her tears. And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." To plow with another man's heifer is to walk in his shoes. To walk behind his heifer, to walk behind his plow, to walk where he would walk. It was a saying that meant to walk in their shoes. Now, to walk in their shoes also meant that you were in their lane, in their territory, and in some cases it would be you were meddling where you ought not to be meddling. And this is what he's saying, that you have involved yourself in my affairs. You have meddled in my life and with my wife. in a way that is not right. And you incidentally did not plow with a heifer. So that might have been purposely like that. You don't plow with a heifer, and you should not be plowing with my heifer. And you should not have meddled and messed with my wife the way that you did. Verse 19. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon. There's another went down, another descent. Another domino is set up, begins to fall, and the escalation rises one more time. Now they solved his riddle. He didn't like the way that he did it, and now he's going to return it to them, but he's going to raise the stakes just a little bit more. He goes down to Ashkelon, another Philistine city, and he killed 30 of their men. He took their apparel, and he gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So he's fulfilling his bet. How nice. He gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained, the word told again, the riddle. And so his anger was aroused, and he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best man. The Riddler was a little upset. The Riddler goes on a little bit of a rampage. The Riddler is going to go now, and he's going to fulfill his bet. So he goes to a Philistine town, kills 30 men, and strips them naked, and brings their clothes back. Does that sound like a man that is set apart for the work of God? It's just the escalation. He just keeps drawing him farther and farther off of the path of his life, of what God had called him to do. But yet, it's time to mention this, is that even when he was called off that path, walked off of the path from which he was called, God was still using it. God was still working in his life in spite of what he was doing in his life. And it makes you wonder what could have happened had he walked where God intended him to walk. What might his life have looked like if he'd have walked where God called him to walk? But instead, he's taking all these detours. But God is still using him, and God is still coming upon him. He kills 30 of these men, strip them naked, bring the 30 clothes back. The bet, remember, was about 30 real three-piece suits, nice shirt, right? That was what the bet was for. What he brings back is a common garment. The word is used to describe a common garment. In fact, it was used to describe a military garment. And it almost is as if Samson went down and found 30 soldiers, Philistine soldiers, and slaughtered 30 men by himself and brings back 30 military garments to give to these 30 men. Does that not send a message? Don't fool with me. I just killed 30 soldiers and brought back 30 garments from them. And so he takes this and he's in a tiff. He's angry at the whole outcome, and he goes back to mom and dad's house, right? He went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion. So one of the things that those 30 men were there for is to make sure she was treated right, because somebody's getting married that day. He ran off, and Dad said, "Next, who's in line?" And of those 30, one of those men stepped up and was given to her in marriage that day. Congratulations, young man, you're getting married. Crazy. Make a good Hallmark movie, wouldn't it? I think that's been done, actually. But the dominoes and the escalation just keep getting ratcheted up. Chapter 15. After a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, which would have been about May, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, "Let me go to my wife into her room." Her father would not permit him to go. Her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Now please take her instead. Samson stays away from some period of time. In his mind, he is married to this woman. Even though there was no consummation of the marriage at the end of the seventh day, he comes back with a gift. And again, this was something that was done in the culture, that a young man would, the wife would stay in her father's house, the young man would visit, and sometimes he would continue to visit until she came up pregnant, and they said, okay, you brought me a grandson, now she's yours. And it's sort of like he's proved it himself. So every time he would come, it was sometimes customary to bring a gift, and so he's bringing a goat, and he intends to go in and consummate the wedding with his bride. When Dad says, oh, I'm sorry, she married another man. And the idea that her sister was better than she, well, what pleased Samson was she was pleasing to his eye. And Dad is just saying, is this sister not just as pleasing, if not more pleasing? Verse 3, Samson said to them, this time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines. It's almost an admission that he was blamed. Blame could be placed on him previously, but now he says, this time I would be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them. Then Samson went and he caught 300 foxes, and he took torches and he turned the foxes tail to tail, and he put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set the torches on fire, and he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. So Samson is getting sort of, again, we ratchet it up, we raise the stakes a little higher, and a bigger domino falls, right? And so now he says, I'm going to be blameless. Who's the judge? Who's the rule? He is. He's already justified himself and said, what I'm about to do, I have every right to do because I'm angry because my wife was given to another. And so he ratchets up the stakes, and now he is going to burn their crops. This 30 foxes, word for foxes was sort of a general word for these animals. It was most likely a jackal, is what a lot of those study Bibles would say would have been much more popular. But the idea that he took these animals and he tied them on a torch between their tails and lit them up, and man, they would have went through this dried grain fields and just started fires everywhere. So the standing grain was the grain that was not yet harvested. The shocks would have been the grain that had been cut and were in heaps and drying. And then, of course, these fires in these fields would have spread until they affected the vineyards and the olive groves. And what you just saw was the total destruction of the food chain for a whole bunch of people. Now remember, we're talking about the Philistines. God's intention was to look for an opportunity, and God was creating an opportunity to move against the Philistines, who had oppressed his people for all of this time. And so on one hand you go, man, what a wreck this guy is, that he's ratcheting this up, that he is destroying this food and starving these people. But this is the very thing that these people were doing to the Israelites in oppressing them. The interesting sort of dilemma of how we look at this. Verse 6. Then the Philistines said, who has done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. So the Philistines came up and they burned her and her father with fire. So the Philistines realize this guy is a whack job, and they are retaliate against him is not going to go well. Somebody's got to pay. He's angry because Dad gave his daughter to someone else, and so he goes and burns them both with fire. Not he, but they, Philistines. Verse 7, Samson said to them, since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that I will cease. So he attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and then he went down and he dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom. So he ratchets it up one more time. Samson said, since you've done this, now I will have to take revenge on you. After I take my revenge, then I'll stop. He attacked them hip and thigh. Hip and thigh is an idiom in that language that we would translate it as he kicked butt. Somebody else in our language said, kick butt. Is that, just kick their butt? That's it? No, it's just an idiom, means that there was a rumble, and he struck them hip and loin. Thigh and loin, I think, is sort of the literal translation. He gave them a violent beating, which turned into a great slaughter. Now the Philistines, verse 9, went up and camped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come against us? And so they're setting up the next big domino as they continue to fall. They're ratcheting up a little bit more. Now that he has gave them a great slaughter, they are retaliating. They are coming back to find him. And they go to Judah and against the men of Judah there, and they're like, what is going on? Why have you come against us? And so they answered, we have come again up to arrest Samson to do to him what he has done to us. They are looking to retaliate and escalate. Verse 11, then 3,000 men of Judah, 3,000 men of Judah, there's the word again, went down. So this one man now decided to go down to the Philistines, which he should not have done. It was completely against the guiding principles of his life. We've seen this escalate and go until now 3,000 men of his country are now involved. He's killed 30 men. He's starved out and burned out the Philistines, and it just keeps getting ratcheted up. These 3,000 men of Judah now went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. It's like a little kid. He did it to me, so I got him back. I remember with three brothers, that was a common saying amongst us. He hit me first, and I hit him back. "3,000 men are now involved in Samson's sin in his life, and it sounds so petty. He sounds like a petulant child. These men, though, assume that Philistine rules over them. We really get a view of the culture. We get a view of what's going on at that time. That they are under the oppression of the Philistines for 40 years. It's a given. These men grew up in this, and they're like, dude, do you not realize that these people rule over us? Don't make them mad. Just fall in line. Don't make waves. Verse 12, but they said to him, we have come down to arrest you, verse 12, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. And then Samson said to him, swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves. He didn't want to harm his own countrymen. He was bringing harm to them. You know, again, it sort of falls in that category. You go, Samson could just say, well, it was just my sin. It was just my ways. I was doing my thing. Nobody was hurt. But somebody is always hurt in our sin. Someone is always hurt when we are out of our lane doing the things that God has not called us to. And our sin has an effect on those around us, in our families, and in our lives, and in our culture. And so they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we will surely not kill you. And they bound him with 2 new ropes, and they brought him up from the rock. New ropes would have been sort of made out of fibers of something that was grown, and so green ones would have been still flexible and tough and would not be easily broken like dried ones. So these are new ropes and should not be able to be broken is the idea. Verse 14. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against them. And then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire. And his bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand, and he took it, and he killed 1,000 men with it. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Lehi means jawbone. And so apparently this place is named, and even when the book was written, this place was named by this. This became a something was understood by both cultures, I'm sure. And legendary tradition and a legend that would be talked about for years to come about this great thing that was done. He came and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and the ropes are broken. He picks up a fresh jawbone, fresh being it's not dried out, it's still got the teeth in it. And it's still strong and becomes quite a weapon in the hands of a man filled with the Spirit of God. A donkey jawbone, they say, would be about 8 inches long. Teeth intact would have made it even more vicious. Reaches out, grabs hold of it, and kills 1,000 men. What a crazy sight. He comes up with this brag, this poem, with the jawbone, with the Lehi of a donkey. Heaps upon heaps, a little bit of a wordplay. The donkey and heaps are basically the same word, has the same consonants in the Hebrew language. And so they sound very much the same, look very much the same. Donkey and heaps sounds the same. And this is, the thought within this wordplay is that Samson made these Philistines look like donkeys. Heaps upon heaps, donkey upon donkey. And with a jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Who's slain 1,000 men? He said, I have. Even when the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. I have done this. He single-handedly made the Philistines look like this heap of donkeys. And I have to wonder if he isn't a little bit of a donkey himself in the hands of the Lord. That he has parted from the path that the Lord had set him on. Doing things his way, very self-willed, very prideful, very, can't think of the word I want. Impulsive. Very impulsive. That describes a donkey. Donkey goes where it wants to go, when it wants to go, and when it don't want to go, it don't go. Period. Was that talking about Samson or a donkey? Yes. You know, I think that's what I think that's maybe the idea behind some of this too, is that Samson thinks he has made donkeys out of these Philistines when it was the work of the Lord behind the scenes. And Samson's not even, he's totally clueless of this, and he becomes sort of this jawbone of a donkey in the hands of the Lord. Verse 18 then he became very thirsty. And he did something he'd never done before. He cried out to the Lord. What a crazy thing. His whole life was committed and dedicated to the Lord. And we don't see anywhere where he cried out to the Lord or acknowledged the Lord in any way. We get to see over this view of his life. We see the Spirit of the Lord came on him, but he didn't even recognize that. He just thought he was a good fighter, I guess, a strong man. He became thirsty, so he cried out to the Lord. And as he cried out to the Lord, it is a complaint. You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. Suddenly, as he's about to die, he's ready to give God a little bit of credit for what is done, what had been done. He says, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Now we all know what Samson deserves right there. Same thing we deserve. But God's gracious and merciful. So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out. And he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. And therefore he called its name En-Hekor, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. En-Hekor means a spring of the caller. The water coming up was the spring of the caller, the one that he called to. So I got like 18 points to end this. But I won't hit them all, huh? Samson went down instead of looking up. The descent started with what was pleasing to his eye, which he should never saw because he shouldn't ever have been in the Philistine city. He went down, and when he went down, he was overcome with other temptations. Pride ruled, kind of my second point. Pride ruled instead of submission and humility toward God. His motivations were any different than Philistines. They were pagan motivations. His motivation was no different. This is exactly what plagued Israel. This is exactly why they were under the oppression of the Philistines. He knew what the rule of his life was. Third point I'd make, it's never too late to cry out to God. It was a good start. He's a long way down the path. The big dominoes have fallen. The escalation had got so great. It was costing people their lives and livelihoods. It's never too late to cry out to God. And don't think that it can be. Don't think that calling out to God isn't the right answer in any situation. Don't think that you can be too far or someone can be too far away that God can't reach them. It's never too late to cry out to God. Probably the bigger thing is the life set apart for God was being wasted. God was using him anyway. But the life that was set apart for God was being wasted. That the guidance system God put in place was being ignored. Warren Wiersbe said, when God isn't permitted to rule in our lives, he overrules and works out his will in spite of our decision. Samson became the Lord's jawbone of a donkey to bring punishment. Probably the thing that we'll talk about a little bit more as we continue on is that in the Hebrews, this Samson that we see is called a man of faith. Listed between Barak and Jephthah in the same sentence with David and Samuel. A man of faith. Well, so far, it ain't looking good for him. Right? So let me end with this final point then. What's the rule and work of your life? As you enter into the new year, what is that? guidance system in your life? What does that overarching theme, that lordship over your life look like? Is it fully intact or just a convenience? Something you got to think about. It's between you and God. It's something that should be considered. If you enter into this year intent on being somewhere within the year or this time next year looking back, what would you find? What do you expect to find? And with the lordship of Jesus over your life, with him in you and through you, and you of him and abiding in him, then we can expect to walk in our lane with him as that guiding principle. And we may not know exactly where we're going and exactly what things look like, but we know exactly what's on the horizon and where it leads to. That's the important part. What's the rule and the work of your life? Let's bow our heads.